If you have followed the rules but feel unsatisfied with where that's gotten you, this podcast is for you.
We'll help you learn how to reach your goals through creativity, intuition, and flow.
Welcome to the Flow into Authenticity podcast.
Woohoo! We're back in action.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Okay, how's everyone doing today?
I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well too. Feeling pretty good.
Wow.
How about you, Allison?
That's amazing.
I know. We're here.
I'm so happy to hear that. I'm just going to apologize. I'm still stuffy because we are always sick in my house. When you have two little kids in like preschool and preschool, you're always sick. But
we've really been feeling for you the past 2 weeks. You've been.
Oh, thanks. I'm feeling pretty good. My voice just probably sounds a little weird. So anyway, sorry you have to listen to this weird stuffy voice, but I'm doing well too. So last time we chatted with you, we talked about the general framework because we have been kind of focused on the F in the flow framework, which is finding inspiration. So a lot of our previous episodes have had something to do with that finding inspiration stage, either thinking about play or thinking about how to make time to find inspiration. But the flow framework is a much bigger sort of process. And the F is finding inspiration. The L stands for letting go of assumptions, which is where we're going to focus our attention today. The O stands for opening up to possibilities. And the W is working it. I can't say that like a normal person. But L is letting go of assumptions. And that is a really important part of the process because there are lots of stories that we tell ourselves that sort of keep us safe, but also keep us from moving in a different direction. So I would love to pass it off to Esther to get us started on thinking about why we have assumptions, how they serve us, and how they hold us back.
Yeah, so we're really talking about, getting unstuck and kind of moving to a place in our life where we're really enjoying we're passionate about what we do. We're enjoying our life and enjoying what we're doing. And so our brain has evolved to create certainty, right? So when we think about how we've evolved throughout the years of human evolution, our brain always wants to keep us safe, right? So if you think about like living in a tribe, we always wanted to know, like, where is the water? What does the predator look like? Where are we safe? So we always wanted to create some kind of certainty. And so our brain has sort of evolved in this way where it prefers to create that sense of certainty. And so it will do this a lot of times to our detriment, right? So it will create these biases for us. And we're going to give you some examples. So this a lot of times hurts us, really, when we're trying to create something new. So we've talked a lot about not following the formula. So if you think about what we've talked about, like our stories of sort of following what we thought we should do, right? That's a kind of good example, I think, right?
Yes. Yeah. So when you do what you think you should do, it's because that's the path that many people have taken before you. And so there's some safety and security and certainty in following that path. Like if I do X, then Y will happen, and then I'll do Z, and then W will happen. et cetera, et cetera. So there's some comfort in knowing what to expect, but maybe XYZ isn't, really what you want out of life. And that's where the problems come in.
Right. Yeah. So I think we get to this point where, and it can be our own culture showing us this kind of formula. It can be other people telling us. It can be our own brain saying, oh, well, this is going to keep us safe, right?
And a lot of times it does. A lot of assumptions we make are so helpful.
Right.
Like, I'm just going to assume that my hot water is going to work. I'm going to assume that when I go to the grocery store, there'll be food for me to buy.
Right.
And it's great that I don't have to think, use my thinking brain to think about, to examine those assumptions.
That's exactly why the brain does this, because the brain always wants to conserve energy.
Yes.
So that's exactly, you're right on. Yeah. So, but when we want to create something new, which is what we're talking about in this podcast, right? We're talking about, okay, you've gotten to this point where you've done that and it's not working for you, right? So what are you going to do? What you gonna do now? What you gotta do now? You gotta come up with something new, right? You gotta innovate. So our brain is also wired for innovation. We just need to tap into it. So that's what we're going to kind of talk about now in this episode. So I think we want to kind of chat with Leslie and I about, because I think there's this whole thing in the creative world, and which is kind of a good example. And then Allison, you can share your example. But so we'll talk about expectations and how that kind of hinders us. And then next week, we'll talk about maybe getting into more of like procrastination, things like fears or blocks like procrastination or imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and things like that, which kind of falls into this category. So, and how this kind of fits into this framework of, getting to your dreams, following your dreams, is when we follow the first step of finding inspiration. We look to find what inspires us, right? What inspires us, what we're passionate about, playing with ideas, getting curious. But then once we start doing that, these fears and expectations and things kind of come in, and they block us from moving forward, right? So we can get in this playful state, but then we're like, oh crap, well, I can't do this. I can't move forward because of this. So Leslie, let's talk about our examples. For me, and this is a good, like, as far as creatives, I think I work with a lot of creatives in my coaching. And for me, when I went to art school when I was 29, I think deep down, I really wanted to be a fine artist. I really knew that I was a fine artist deep down. But I had the assumption that I couldn't make money as a fine artist. So I had to do commercial art. And I talked to a ton of people who have had this similar thing where they went to school for design or something more practical. And I think that there's a certain logic to that, and it's kind of nice to have something to fall back on that is sort of practical, that can pay the bills, but that gets to a point where your core creative essence, which I talk about, your intuition is sort of, it gets to this point where you just can't do that anymore. There's more of you that wants to come out, and you have to you come up against those assumptions. Like, actually, what I really want to do is be a fine artist, but I have this assumption that I can't make a living. So that's that big assumption. So, and I know that Leslie, you have, you're kind of in the beginning stages of your career, but you and I have talked about this a lot, in in your process. So why don't you go ahead and talk about that?
Yeah, we definitely have talked about it a lot because you and I met in spaces where we were doing what we thought a job that we thought we could make money at, but it wasn't the expression of our creativity that we really wanted to be in. And so I think for me, it definitely, earlier you kind of alluded to kind of our cultural conditioning and things like that, that may impact this sort of drive to follow the formula. And that definitely was my trajectory, right? I grew up in this family. It was like, you go to college, you do something practical. I told my dad once I wanted to be a dance teacher, and he was like, you could never make any money doing that. And I don't think I really think that he was genuinely trying to help me take care of myself. But, that stuck with me. So I always felt like I needed to do something practical, even though I loved writing and art, and I just couldn't figure out a way in my mind to say, oh, but I could make money doing that creative type of writing. And so I didn't even major in writing in college. I majored in speech and hearing sciences, and then ended up doing writing down the road, doing marketing writing, content writing, copywriting, things like that. And I just believed and assumed I could never make money with my creative work. But then once I started to let go of that a little bit, and I got into communities where people were doing creative writing, I noticed there were plenty of people around me that were making money, selling their work, writing books, getting grants, all kinds of things. And people that were also had different day jobs that had nothing to do with writing, that just allowed them the space to do their creative work.
It's funny how everyone's an expert. I really stop myself from saying a fucking expert. So I studied theater. I was really into theater, and I was a philosophy major. And then I added on a math major, and my dad's like, what are you going to do with a math major? And I'm like, are you kidding me?
Whoa.
I've been doing theater and philosophy, and you're asking me what the fuck I'm going to do with a math major? You don't know shit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But these, people in our lives are it's the limiting beliefs aren't always coming from ourselves, are also coming from the things that people are telling us, like, you can't be a dance teacher. Well, you don't know what a dance teacher makes, and you don't know if it's important that to me that I make money doing this thing that I'm interested in. So yeah, there are a lot of assumptions that people make about you, a lot of things people think they know about certain professions and certain paths. And it's really frustrating that those messages get passed on, and they're sort of like, little viruses in your brain that other people can pass on to you.
It's very true. And that was an assumption that I carried around for a very, very long time, only until very recently, right? The last few years that I've started to go, oh, maybe I can do this. Oh, look at these people around me. They're doing it. They've found ways to make it work, and it's possible. And, slowly putting myself out there, getting a little feedback, getting a little encouragement to kind of help me shift and get a little more unstuck, as it were.
Yeah, I think it's so important that we've talked about like role models or expanders before, but the way that your brain is able to move past those limiting beliefs or those assumptions is through seeing other people doing it. And so having that and that's why being in community and finding those people is so important, right? Is to be able to show yourself and your brain that it's possible. And so that's so important. And I think, just recognizing like where we pick these things up, right? We pick them up through our culture, whatever our culture is, like if you've, some people grew up in a culture that was very limiting, depending on where you lived. Last time we were talking about, and I actually had this discussion with a lot of people lately that we were talking about, moms who actually show us that things are possible for us, and parents or caretakers that show us what's possible, or teachers being in that sort of environment. And we can pick up beliefs from ourself, right? So as babies or as kids, even pre-verbal, we have this very deep need to be seen and safe and soothed. And so from very young, we have these needs, and if they aren't being met, then we create beliefs, we create assumptions and beliefs in order to be accepted, be loved. And so those are those deep things that can be even deeper than some of those peripheral ones, like, not making money and things like I have to be a certain way, I can't be loud, or I can't be myself in order to be loved. And that translates a lot, actually.
A lot of stuff that can be very wide and deep, doesn't it?
Especially the creative world. Yeah.
Right.
So
insecurity. I keep on kind of thinking we're dancing around insecurities, something in our childhood, something that was missing led to us being insecure about something. And that can be really damaging, because then we do all sorts of shenanigans to try and keep ourselves safe.
Right.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about that, I think, next time, because we're going to get into the, more of those fears and procrastination and imposter syndrome
type of thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Allison, I know you have a very interesting perspective about beliefs and fears and anxiety in the context of your students. And I wonder if you could share a little bit about that with our listeners.
Yes. So the class that I teach most often is like a quantitative reasoning class. It's called Quantitative Literacy and Social Justice. So the students that I have in that class tend to be like communication majors and theater majors and criminal justice and sports and exercise science majors, but basically a lot of types of majors who probably, if they never took a math class again in their lives, they would be so happy about that. And they're being forced to be in my class. Like, no one is taking my class because they think it would be really fun. So on the first day, I asked people to think of one word. What's the first word that comes to mind when you think about math? And invariably, it's like, people are telling me their word is terrifying or frightening or, stressful or impossible. Sometimes they'll give me kind of neutral words like challenging or useful, things like that. But for the most part, a lot of the words that come out of their mouths are very emotionally charged and very negative. And my students also write their math autobiographies in the first week of class. And so I get to learn a little bit about their history. And I could probably write a generic math autobiography that would sound like 90% of my students' autobiographies, because they are remarkably similar to each other. It's like, oh, when I was a kid, I used to like math, and then something happened and I had a teacher who told me I was stupid, and then I started feeling really insecure, and then, I couldn't think, and I started getting Fs in my math classes, and then I hated it so much, and now I'm just not a math person, and I can't do math. So there's always some narrative where something happened, they started to feel stupid, they stopped seeing the usefulness in what they were studying, and then they just sort of gave up. So my students are coming into class with so many limiting beliefs about math. First of all, they don't really have a good sense of what math is, what that includes. And that's the fault of the way we teach math, public education, and probably the fault of lots of wonderful, caring, thoughtful, loving teachers that we put in classes to teach math when they themselves have math anxiety, and math anxiety is contagious. I'm sort of going on a rant here. But so my students develop all these beliefs about math, and also these beliefs about their own abilities to do math. And so my whole goal in class is not to teach them how to, how credit cards work, even though I do teach them that. It's not to teach them about standard deviation, even though I do teach them about standard deviation. But my main goal is to change their beliefs about math and their beliefs about their capability to do it. And I feel like I'm actually quite successful in doing that. But it really requires students to be really honest with me and really honest with each other about what their fears, what their beliefs, what their insecurities are around math. Mm-hmm. And then we just say, okay, this is our foundation. This is where we're starting. This is what we're working with. So we're all in this together. We're all going to get through this. We're all going to show each other and show ourselves that we are capable, because we're going to learn this material. We're going to find some success. We're going to learn about types of math that we didn't even know was math, like voting theory, like how to decide who wins an election. Like that's a big mathematical field, and people don't think of that as being mathematical. Or there are a lot of artistic things that are mathematical, a lot of applications of math in areas of social justice that people don't think of as being math, but they're in the realms that students actually do care about and do connect with and do want to have some skill at being able to do some of these mathematical things, so that they can read a news article and understand it, or, when they're doing their work in sociology or psychology, that they're capable of computing statistics that can help them make an argument for something that they want to, an argument they want to be able to support. So people start to see the usefulness. They start to see that the world of math is a lot broader than they thought it was. And they start to view themselves as being more capable than they thought they were. And I just think there's no way when most students get into a math class like pre-calculus or college algebra, and the instructor isn't oriented around changing those beliefs, then it's so hard for students to actually learn math. Because if you're not addressing those beliefs, then people can't be open to thinking about things. They can't be open to thinking about and learning the content unless they have a chance to share their fears and interrogate those fears and maybe let go of those fears, because that's the only way they can move forward and really open up to the possibility that they are capable, and that, maybe there is something about math that could be useful or helpful to them, not just to scientists or mathematicians, but to them in their own lives.
Your students are so lucky to have
you. I wish I had
for you as a I never in a million years, here I am. I'm going to be letting go of some assumptions about math just in this moment. I would have never envisioned math as being a reflective subject. Like the very fact that you are encouraging students to, be honest and vulnerable and challenge, maybe very embedded beliefs, just the math autobiography. Beautiful. It's so beautiful. It's amazing.
Really beautiful.
I mean, it's so amazing.
I have major math anxiety. And I think you and I have talked a lot about how there's kind of two major blocks, right? There's people who have a math block and people who have a creativity block. So I experience the same thing with just people that I meet randomly, not students, but people that I meet randomly. I mean, students have other blocks, but people that I meet randomly on the street who would say like, I'm not creative,
Oh, I can't. God.
So it's this
9.9 times out of 10 when I tell people, random people that I'm a math professor, they're like, oh God. Oh, I hate math. Oh, I'm not good at math.
So
you
this
must be a genius.
assumptions, right?
Yes.
This assumption. And so and people say the same thing, like, I can't draw a straight line. Well, I can't draw a straight line. Why is the assumption that you can draw a straight line?
That's my criteria. That's the benchmark.
And it's so funny. It's so funny because I think, like, a lot of times those people are the ones that actually want to be artists and want to do something creative. And it's so interesting to me that they look at me with this, like, there's a deep sadness in their eyes,
Someone told them a long time ago that they were bad at it, or some negative experience happened to them very long time ago, and they just
so this cultural assumption of what an artist is, or what being creative, or what math is. And I love, Allison, that you start with education, and I think that's where we need to start with our own assumptions. So like, what are the assumptions that you have? So whenever you started this process, right? So like, we've been talking in this podcast about, where you're stuck. Where are you stuck in your life? So, like, for me right now, I guess, we could all talk about where we feel stuck, but like, I love doing this in my life just randomly. It's like, I feel stuck actually living in Seattle because it's like, this weather is just, I feel like it's killing me. Like, I'm having a hard time. And what are my assumptions around, that I can't leave, or what are those assumptions, And so, but we'll get more into that. But where was I going with this? Educating, just looking around and educating ourselves on what is that assumption true, right?
Yes.
First of all, like, what is my assumption that I have to be here indefinitely, that I'm never going to be able to leave because my husband works here. He has a job that he, wants to stay in, or whatever. Well, kind of the workaround is that next year I'm going to be like traveling more and like going to places where I can leave. Maybe I'm not going to move right away, but what are the other options, right? And so looking at it from a different perspective. That's what we're going for here. It's like, I love that education piece of, okay, looking at broader.
The students in my classes, the goal is for them not, I don't want them to become math majors. That's not the goal.
Right.
I don't want you to move to Aruba. That's not the goal. I just,
maybe.
But it would be great if you had more sunshine in your life. And it would be great for my students if they felt more capable.
Yeah, I love that. It was like, we think about it in such a black or white, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, and oh my gosh, I love this discussion because Leslie, we were going to talk a little bit more about the nuance. So I think a lot of times in Western culture, especially, we think in this binary.
Right. All or nothing.
Yeah. So we think, okay, well, this is the goal that I want, right? It has to look like this.
Right.
And so I talk a lot about, like, when we're doing this process of daydreaming of like, what actually do I want my life to look like? We can get really like stuck in, okay, this is exactly what I want. And I have to create a formula to get there, a plan to get there. So let's talk about the nuance, right, of being open to more possibilities of what could happen to get you to a place where you're loving your life, or where you are living in your purpose, or you're living your passions. So Leslie and I, we were kind of talking about, this income stream, like this idea of, can you make money through your art?
Right.
And this idea of, well, I have to make all of my money from my art, right?
Yes.
That's kind of that all or nothing, that binary. And I love what Elizabeth Gilbert says about putting so much pressure on your creativity or the thing that you love. And I think this is really helpful in this discussion, no matter if you're an artist or whatever in this process, when you're trying to figure out what it is that you want, is not to put too much pressure on that thing. Right. So, Leslie, talk a little bit about your ideas behind, the assumption around, does all my money have to come from this, or can it come from other income streams? And
yeah, so as I was shifting and kind of starting to let myself explore with creative writing, and then discovering, oh, this is what I actually really like to do. This feels like an authentic space for me. This is how I want to write. I was like, started to panic because I was like, oh my God, how do I make money? How do I have this career? How do I write a bestseller? Like all these things I'm kind of getting flooded with. How do I make this work? Now I know I want to do this. How do I make it work? I have to, be self-sufficient and, have a retirement fund off of my writing. And it, it ends up putting so much pressure. It makes me not want to do it sometimes. So I kind of had to slow down and be like, as someone who has terrible anxiety, I often need to know how I'm going to get to A to Z, and I need every little stop in between before I can actually make a leap. And I started to learn to just be like, how do I get to B? Or like A sub 1, right? Like so I had to sort of do slow bites, and I would get overwhelmed because I'd look and I'd be like, oh, I'm not qualified to do that job. I don't have this big portfolio. I can't do, and then I thought, I have to start somewhere. So I did, right? I just started submitting small pieces. I submitted a letter to the editor to the Seattle Times. It got published. I submitted another piece recently. It got published. None of that pays. And I started to pay attention. I alluded to this earlier about people in my community that I'm seeing, doing all spectrum of jobs. Some people have really high paying editing jobs and then they also write books, or some people freelance and they do really well at that. And they just freelance all their writing and they're able to make a really good living at that. Other people do some completely other discipline unrelated to writing and then just write when they can't, I started to see there's a lot of different ways to do this. And I also have learned to be patient and gentle with myself, to recognize I'm just starting out. Like I've just made this shift and I'm not going to be able to go from 0 to 60 instantaneously. So I'm just kind of taking it slower and in bite-sized increments, I guess, digestible increments of like, it's okay. It's okay that I'm just writing a piece, testing it out, putting it out. Like I'm also working in a chronically ill brain and body, right? I can't compare myself to other people who maybe don't have those same variables in their life. So just really learning to compare myself to myself and not to anyone else, that there's millions of paths to being able to do what I want to do.
That's such a good point about role models. So we talk a lot about role models. It's important not to just have one role model, because that can be very limiting.
Yes.
You need a really diverse array. And the same is true of mentors. It's really important not to just rely on a single mentor, but to have lots of mentors. So maybe, a mentor who also has chronic illness, who
for all the things that you, for all the things that you want too.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And it doesn't, you're not going to find all of that in one person, because you're the only person that, where all of those things come together and intersect. So you just need lots of different examples, lots of different types of people to support you. And then what you said about not comparing yourself to other people, that is like the number.
Huge. That's huge. And it's such a trap that we all fall into, I think.
Yeah.
And you just can't. You just compare yourself to yourself. Like,
Right.
just,
Yeah.
like, think if you're into sports and you like personal records, personal bet, like, think of it like that. Like, just challenge
Right.
yourself. Don't worry about what anyone else is doing.
Yeah.
The
That's
one-
why oh, go ahead.
The one caveat about having multiple role models is that something that I found myself doing is I take the best aspect of each role model
Mm,
and I imagine that it's possible for all those bests to be in one
Yes.
person. And
And
then I'm trying to be that person.
Yes,
I have to
absolutely.
remind myself it's impossible for this magical person doesn't exist.
Right. And that's the thing I think we forget too. Like, when we look at role models, is that person had a journey too.
Yes.
That person went through some really hard stuff,
Mhm.
and you don't know that. You may not know all that stuff. And so I think of this with jealousy. I know there's a lot of different ways to interpret jealousy, but one of the things I like to remind myself of, if I'm going to be jealous of someone, I have to be jealous of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right? I have to be jealous of their whole journey then,
Yeah.
because they didn't just wake up and they're at this level.
So
right?
good.
They
Yeah,
had to
so
get
good.
there.
And you're not seeing the things about that person that they
Right.
don't want you to see as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're not all advertising every
Yeah.
hardship that we have overcome.
Right. You're not their
Yeah,
therapist.
that's such a good point. A lot of this is like why I talk about, intuition, because it's like, it's so easy for us when we're kind of in this stage to look outside of ourselves for kind of that formula or what we should be doing, and it's, if we really, like Leslie, like I hear you tapping into yourself and really going, okay, what does it feel like what does it look like to like feel good about what I'm doing right now?
Yeah.
Like what feels good to me right now? Going slowly, doing that one thing at a time and listening to that next step, and I love what you said about like that next step, because that's actually my favorite thing to work with people on in their journey with coaching. Like, I love, because so many people do just want to jump into, okay, full time. I want to be full-time artist or whatever. But what is the next step? What is the next? Maybe it's a job that is like a bridge job that gets you more time and energy to create. That's actually not sucking the life out of you, that you're actually enjoying and gives you time to create so that you don't have to put pressure on all of your, so taking those, following our intuition step by step, it can look, letting go of those expectations. I think, especially with jobs, so many people are like, well, if I have to get a day job, it's going to suck, or I can only get this kind of day job. I want to do a whole episode on my little special formula on how to create what you want, like especially like
it's not a formula.
I know, I call it a formula.
Framework.
It's like a little like 4-step process of, okay, if you're looking to find your next job or find your next house or find your next love or whatever, what is it that you actually need to do to open up to those possibilities, to let go of assumptions? And it has to do with how you want to feel, right? More than anything, and what you actually need. Because if most of us just go into it saying, oh, well, I can only live here, or I can only get this kind of partner, or I can only get this kind of job. And those are those assumptions. So, yeah. So letting go, when we let go of those, what comes to us, and I love Bryn's example that we talked with Bryn last week, of letting go of those assumptions. We can get a job at an antique store that actually really fulfills us and is super fun, but has nothing to do with well, not directly related to what we're creating in our creative work or our passion or what we're passionate about.
Yeah. It just goes to what you were saying earlier about binary, right? Like no one thing has to fulfill all the things, right?
Yeah.
No one role model has to fulfill all the things for you. No, your partner doesn't have to fulfill all the things. Like there's lots of different ways that you can get what you need.
Yeah.
And that is the huge, I think, assumption that many of us have a hard time letting go, that keeps us stuck, is that we only think one thing can solve all the things, right? Like I can only get this huge writing job. I can only, no, there's lots of different ways to get there.
We get so focused. We get so focused on what we think we want that we don't see actually what the universe or what life wants to bring to us. And that's how we kind of can kind of make it easier on ourselves and kind of co-create with the universe and like allow this magic to happen.
Right. And that's the danger of, like, Leslie, what you were saying. If you're going to do something, you want a whole plan that's going to get you from A to Z. Well, that doesn't leave room for the magic to happen. That doesn't leave room for you to co-create with the universe or with your partner or with friends who you haven't even yet made.
Yeah. With other people too. Right.
Right.
Yes. Think about it in like, that's it. Oh my gosh, I love this discussion because it really is, again, that the culture that's been passed down to us, this colonizing culture of, it's all about me, it's the individual. Because when we are so focused on us and our plan and the material end goal, we block out everybody else. And that we are a gift to everybody else, and everybody else is a gift. We're a part of this beautiful intersection, and where everybody can help everybody else, and we have this beautiful gift inside of us to help people, and people can help us too. And so I love that discussion too.
Yeah. Are you talking about Encanto right now?
Yes, Encanto.
I've been watching a lot of Encanto, and that's that's part of the message. Like,
yep,
you are not this one skill you can do. You are you, and you are a gift to your family and your friends, and there's so much more to you than this one thing, this one A to Z path that you've planned out for yourself. There's so much more to you than that really narrow path. And so if you have things like too mapped out and too prescribed, then you might be missing out on some connections you could be making. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Allison, I love this so much. This is why we're collaborators. So, we were talking, I can't remember, I think it was before the last podcast, and we were talking about this funnel, this framework, and I was talking about this whole idea of a gift, and you said, no, it's like seeds of gifts. Like it's like you come into this world with multiple options, like multiple gifts that you could nurture. And I think that's so true. Like we all have choices, that all these gifts that we could nurture, right? And so there are all these possibilities, but we have to kind of make these choices along the way. And then life sort of helps us making these choices and supports us. And I love this discussion.
Yeah.
I love seeing it that way.
I want to make sure we don't miss out on talking about Byron Katie's.
Oh yeah, we gotta wrap it up here. So
I think this is really powerful.
So how do we? Yeah. So if we have these assumptions, what do we do, and how? I think a lot of people don't talk about how do we actually let go of these assumptions. But Byron Katie has an amazing framework around this.
Yeah. So basically, if you have a certain belief or a thought. Byron goes by she, her. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. So Byron says, first thing you ask yourself is it true? So you have a thought like, I'm not good at math, or, I can't be a writer. Is it true? Can you absolutely know that it's true? And just asking yourself that question, it could be very eye-opening. Like, wait a minute. Wow, I really believe that that's true, but maybe it's not. So it's really interesting to just start to interrogate that belief. What comes after that, Esther?
So number two is that can you absolutely know that it's true? So your brain will, try to actually convince you that it is true. So we have to, kind of interrogate ourselves. And I think this is where that role models or expanders come in, where we can look at and see, okay, look around and see who's doing this, who is somebody that I can look to that might be an example of where this isn't true. And then the third point is how do you
react?
Yeah, how do you react? So how do you react in your body, in your mind when you believe this? So if I believe that I'm not good at math, I know how I react.
How do you react to that?
Complete panic, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel it in my body. I could start crying if I had to do my taxes, things like that.
So what happens when you believe that thought?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? How does it feel in your body? What kinds of, do you feel your brain shutting down?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like a fight or flight need to protect yourself when you have that thought?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So that actually shows you where in your timeline you pick that up, right? So you can actually do somatic work around that, or trauma healing work around that if like EMDR or any other somatic work around when you picked up that belief, right? Or inner child work or things like that to help you get through those beliefs if they're really deep rooted like that.
Right. And they really become part of our identity. And that's scary to let go of something, to potentially let go of something that we feel is really a part of our identity. And that's a really fixed mindset place, right?
Yeah.
And we all know from Carol Dweck's research that if you have that fixed mindset about yourself, you have this really fixed notion of your identity and your capabilities, it's really hard to get out of that unless you question that belief.
Yeah.
So what happens when you believe that thought, and who would you be without the thought?
Yeah. So for number 4, who would you be without the thought? What could you do without that thought? Oh my gosh. I literally can't even imagine myself without that math anxiety.
I was going to say, Esther,
weird?
Can you see yourself as a mathematician? Like, could you,
I mean, no, but it's funny because I often say that I have a very science-oriented brain, but the reason why I steered away from science is purely because of math.
Oh my gosh. That resonates so much with me. I feel very similar about myself in some ways.
And that is so sad, because how many people could be following paths that they are passionate about, like studying neuroscience, but maybe they couldn't pass the calculus class they needed to pass for that major. Right. And that's not about them. Can I just go on a little tangent here? I mean, this is why we're trying to humanize math, because math isn't done by computers and brains and boxes. It's done by people who have fears and limiting beliefs. And unless you deal with those root issues, you can't get past that block. And, but it's totally doable to get past that block. It's totally doable to change your perception about what you're capable of, who you are as a person. So I love this question. Who would you be without the thought?
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't have this thought that you couldn't do math, Esther, would you be a neuroscientist?
Possibly. Yeah. I wanted to be a biologist. But yeah, I love neuroscience. So, and also, as far as creatives go, the other big block, what could you create? What kind, and, if I often think if I hadn't have believed that I couldn't be a fine artist, where would I be right now?
Right.
What kind of artist, where would my art be right now? So, that's tough.
They're big questions.
Whew, man.
This is new. I am not terribly familiar with Byron Katie's work, but this is fascinating to me, and I can see how powerful it could be to work through some of this. So who would you be without the thought? And then there's the next piece to it as well, right? It's turn the thought around. And what is the opposite of that thought? Esther, can you talk a little bit about that?
So if my thought is I cannot do math, once I do the exploration around that, what does that look like? Yes, there's a possibility. If I had Allison as my teacher, I could do math probably. And I could probably get excited about it, right?
Yeah.
Because what math is would change in your mind. Like when you say I can't do math, you're saying two things. You're saying I know exactly what math is, and it's a thing I can't do.
Oh, that's beautiful, Allison.
So not only are we going to change the it's a thing I can't do, but we're going to change your idea of what math is. And math is creative, and math connects to things you care about. And doing math can look a ton of different ways. And so it's just about finding what is my way to get interested
what is my way?
What's my angle? What do where does this align with my passions? Where does math align with something I'm passionate about?
So
where does the process of doing math align with some process that I'm really good at doing? I've had students who are really good writers in my math classes. And oh my God, when you have them explaining math through writing, then suddenly they just blossom. It's like, okay, I've figured out how to help them harness something they're really good at in order to get a deeper understanding of math.
That is so beautiful. No, I love that. Like, what is your because okay, so listeners, what are your assumptions about what you can't do, right? And what do you think it is, right? What do you think it is? And then what actually is it? And what is your way? What is going to be and you probably don't know yet. Like Leslie, I don't know, you're kind of starting to figure out your way.
Yeah. I feel like, I'm kind of in the very beginning stages of all of this. So I feel like I'm just kind of moving out of the L framework and moving maybe into the O that we'll definitely start talking about. But like, in the beginning, Esther, to go, to the visualization of like a funnel, right? Like I was like, wanted to take all the classes about, writing and figure it out. I want to try this and this and this. And I was just kind of all over the place. And then I started to figure it out a little bit. Like I was like, this is how I like to write. This is what I want to write. This is where I want to write. And so now I feel a little less pulled to take all the classes. I'm being a little more selective, and I am, like, okay, I could do that. Like, I just feel like I'm moving into the next part of it. And it's very liberating.
Yeah.
I could feel it in my body. I mean, it feels different. It feels good.
And that's what happened. I love that. That's what sorry.
Go for it.
That's what happens when we go through this process, is that we go through the stage of exploration. And then when we let go of the expectations, we begin to hone in on our uniqueness, right? Because we let go of those things that are holding us back or that we think that we should be. And that's so beautiful, Leslie, that you're like, yeah, that actually works, because then I'm able to just be me.
Right. I don't have an outcome like a a long-term, like, I just like, I'm like, yeah, I want to do this. I'm just going. So it's freeing.
It's freeing, and you can see
Yeah.
like, actually, this is what I love. This is
Mhm.
what I love.
Yeah. Leslie, so what has what this is changed for you? So there are limiting beliefs around like, I can be a writer or I can't be a writer. But also, has your conception of what a writer is and what a writer does changed?
Yes. It's very demystified for me, right? I think oftentimes when we're trying to, break into something,
I love that.
It feels very like, oh, I can't do that with this whole thing, right? Of, it feels too big and professional or whatever. Like, I can't do that. And then I'm like, oh, they're just people, right?
Right.
Writers are just people, doing their thing, and they're just working to hone a skill, right?
Yeah.
And then plugging it into this, outlet and plugging it here, and that shifts all the time. So definitely, I just feel like the biggest thing for me is that it's been demystified as like this unobtainable, pedestal thing, like these brilliant authors, and you're like, but they're just people at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's exactly
really
cool. When there's that mystery around something, it seems impossible. It's like, I can't run a marathon. Well, actually, if I had the right training regimen, and if I actually stared running, I bet I could run a marathon.
It's like my plant story, like how I thought I couldn't, raise plants because I killed all the plants. And I was like, this mystery of like, how in the world do people grow plants?
Maybe we say that because we're like, I couldn't run a marathon today.
Right.
Okay, that's true. That's true.
Right.
So, but we don't kind of think about all the intermediate steps that would help you achieve that. Like, no, I can't be a professional writer tomorrow, but I can do that if I,
Yeah. And it's like that. I don't know if it's from the fixed mindset, growth mindset. Is it Carol Dweck? Is that the author? I don't know if this is from her work, but it's like adding the yet at the end of the sentence, right?
Yes.
I can't run a marathon yet. I can't, I'm not a professional author yet. Like, it's just something to work towards. So that's that shift of like,
I love that.
But it doesn't mean I could never be one, or that there's something there for me in the spectrum of that.
Yeah. Okay. So this is such a great, I love this conversation. Let's do our 4%, which is how we want to challenge you all at the end to kind of put this into practice. So just a tiny little 4% change is how we kind of move forward into that yet.
Right. So what is an assumption you're making, or a fear or belief you have? And especially as it relates to something that you want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So okay, maybe you think you're not a math person, but you're not passionate about doing something that relates to math. But, maybe you want to become a writer, but you're making an assumption that that's not a path that you can follow. So what's an assumption you're making, or a fear or belief you have that might be getting in the way of you doing something that you're actually really excited about or interested in? Yeah. And ask yourself, is it true? Is that what you're going to say, Esther?
Yeah. And so, and then like, I always think of this what if question, right? So I think every kind of innovation has always started with looking at something differently, right? So we're looking at this assumption, and I think we've given a lot of great examples today. And then kind of asking yourself, what if it's not true? Or what if I could do that? So asking yourself, is it true? Is this true? And you can go and look at Byron Katie's work and do those 4 steps too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then next time we'll build on what we've been talking today and talk about some more specific blocks. So the 3 that we keep on mentioning are procrastination, imposter syndrome, and perfectionism. And there's a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, a lot of beliefs surrounding each of those blocks, and each of those things can potentially hold us back from it, from doing what we want to do and living our lives more authentically, with more purpose. So that's where we're headed next time.
Yeah. So I just want to tell people, if you are feeling stuck and you are kind of working through this process, if you are a creative, I have a free Get Unstuck challenge. So if you'd like to download that, go to my website, flowintoauthenticity.com. You can download that, or get a link to that free Get Unstuck challenge. And you can also find more information about everything that I do as a coach on that website and on my YouTube channel. And we'll put links to that here. And thank you all for joining us during this podcast. And if you have been enjoying it, please like and subscribe to this podcast. We really appreciate it. And if you could leave a great review if you've been enjoying it, that would be super awesome too.
And if you hate it and you're like not getting anything out of this podcast, don't review us.
Just move on to the next podcast.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We won't have hurt feelings.
Yeah.
JK, you could do whatever you want. We're like, we're totally influencing our audience here.
No, that's what Glennon Doyle says that at the end of her podcast.
Oh.
If you don't, yeah, she says if you don't like it, then you don't
Fuck
need to leave
off.
a podcast. Yeah, you don't need to leave a All right. Well, thank you so much. We love you all. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will talk to you next time.
Woohoo! Bye.
Bye.
Flow into Authenticity is hosted by Esther Loopstra, Leslie Blumenstein, and me, Allison Henrich. Our original theme music is by James Wetzel. Podcast editing is by Dave Visaya. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share Flow into Authenticity from your favorite podcast app.